Thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar on turning space blind spots into real-time savings. And we're going to be looking at how to connect always-on data with making smart workplace space decisions. My name is Lee DeLine, and I'm the Director of Partner Marketing here at AppSpace, the world's leading workplace experience platform. And I'm joined by Carolyn Volkening, our Chief Delivery Officer and Head of Product here at AppSpace, and our good friend Kelby Green, co-founder and CTO from VergeSense. Now, we're proud to partner in this webinar with VergeSense, an AI-powered workplace occupancy intelligence platform that's helping companies analyze and optimize their real estate utilization and workplace design. So we'll continue to give a few more minutes for people to join, but in the meantime, let me run through just a few quick housekeeping items. Obviously, everyone's been muted. Cameras are turned off to save on bandwidth, and we will be sending out the recording after this webinar. We'll bring that up again at the end of the call, along with an opportunity for questions and answers. Now, just because the cameras and mics are off doesn't mean you can't participate. On the right-hand side, there is that area for questions. We are going to be taking time to answer them, and it will give everyone an opportunity with your questions to get the most out of this opportunity to have a conversation. And there's a chance to jump in with comments. So do so now, please. We love it when people say hi, and say hi from wherever you are in the world. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelby to kick us off.
Cool. So yeah, Lee, great intro. Really excited to be here. AppSpace is one of our, best partners. We love to do events like this, and really happy to have been chosen to join you guys here. Very short intro from me. I'm the CTO and co-founder of VergeSense. I've been in this space for a long time. Really gone deep technically. I'm a very technical person as a CTO, obviously, and I care very deeply about the technical aspects, the modeling, the quantification of some of the problems that we're going to talk about today. And so, yeah, I'm excited to dive in and talk about the power of data in solving some of the problems in the workplace. And I know that on our intros, we had to pick our TV binge currently, and mine is definitely the World Cup. I'm a big World Cup guy. I will be rooting for France later today. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Carolyn.
Yeah, and the World Cup is hard to follow, right? But so thanks, Lee. And Lee did an introduction. So I'm Carolyn Volkening. I'm the Chief Delivery Officer and Head of Product at AppSpace. And I'm really excited to be here with Kelby, because I feel like we've been on this journey together. And everyone who is here at the webinar or listens to this webinar, we've all been on this journey together. And I go back to COVID, right, where suddenly the world became interested in desk reservations and getting everyone back to work and how are we going to handle this. But it quickly morphed, and that's where VergeSense and AppSpace started working more closely together. As we were hearing from customers, we want to move just from reserving spaces to managing spaces. And what we're experiencing now is the next leap. Like, we want to do more than manage spaces. We actually want to understand how they're being used, so we can be mindful and planful. And we've got this opportunity now with all this data at our hands, and with AI, to make a major change in how we approach space management. So I think it's a really exciting time. So, totally. And I promise I will make maybe one, maybe two Survivor references, but watched it originally when it came out so long ago, and then only restarted it again and started from the beginning when my 28-year-old son let me know that he and all his friends were watching it. It's like, are you crazy?
What season are we on right now? We're on like the 40-something or something.
Yeah, I'm on 15, season 15. Yeah. So yeah.
That show is eternal.
Yeah, it is. But the next generation is totally into it, which just blew my mind.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. All right, so we'll go. I'm going to kick us off here to talk about, the title of the webinar is, how to get more out of these blind spots. And the problem is real, right? That there's real money at stake here. In many cases, we're kind of operating from this old model, right? We're relying on guesswork. We're relying on what we call data adjacent information. It's information about what happened, last month, last quarter. We still use spreadsheets in many cases to manage our business and to manage our space. And what we find is that what that does is it justifies decisions we made, or maybe bad decisions that we made, but it doesn't necessarily solve the here and now. And the stakes are real. The data, I'm sure you guys have heard before, that 30% of meeting rooms globally are empty on paper, but to your employees that are locked out, right? So it creates this sense of there's not enough space, but actually there's plenty of space in many cases. And we hear more and more of companies like, it's not only just relying on old stale spreadsheets, but we spent all this money on consulting. We spent this money to try to understand how we're going to use the space when everyone comes back to the office. And we made poor decisions, and now they're adjusting what they're doing. And so the focus on real-time data will help us with these, with a lot of these blind spots. We go next, the next slide. And I think this will be my last Survivor reference, right? The whole vibe thing. Like, we think we know what's happening, right? We think that, our gut tells us that the rooms there's not enough space. And I mean, how many times do you hear people say, I trust my gut. And if you're watching Survivor, you want to scream at them, don't trust your gut. They're going to blindside you. But this is the case where we think we know what's going on. And so then as businesses, we spend money. And I think this is a funny number here. We spend $200,000 on a new layout. Who is ever doing a new layout for $200,000? You can't even touch that, right? But the truth is, rooms may look like they're 100% booked, but we know from the sensors that 30% of them are empty. And if we can start to really understand what's happening, then we can save the money that we need to, because we have the correct data in our hands.
Yeah,
So
and one of the things, and just to jump in real quick on this side, one of the things that I really like in this space, like sort of in almost a perverse way, is how many pitfalls there are. There's so often like this intuitive solution to a perceived problem. And like almost more than 50% of the time, the intuitive solution is like encouraging bad behavior, or might be making it worse, or isn't actually getting at the root of the problem. And there's just so many of those pitfalls. And one of my favorite ones from, a conference once was hearing about how there was a noise problem in an open area. So the company decided to put up larger barriers, higher barriers to block more sound, but that made all the employees feel like they were alone. And so they actually talked louder, and it made it worse. And it's just like the whole industry is full of these, and it's, this is one of many examples.
Yeah.
All right, so I think I'm going to pick up here. So really today, Carolyn really has set the table well, but there is a very well-defined theme here, and that is a mindset shift. And so a lot of this kind of, I think, the way we were thinking when we started or, decided to attack this problem as companies is there was an old way, and we think there's a better way. We think there's a new way to do these things that's more effective. And one of the core principles of that is really being always on, having a continuous data collection strategy, and not just having this be batched or, pulled quarterly or things like that. And in order to be able to do that, in order to be able to have a system that's sort of continuously pulling everything together, you have to have everything to be able to talk to each other. And so linking up systems, the perfect example is VergeSense and AppSpace have a very deep integration where data flows without requiring clicking of buttons or, periodic syncing or things like that. And then if you can cut out these things, and the two sort of things I always say it's good to avoid is, don't do deep copies. Try not to deep copy data between systems. And then make sure you can actually link the data back to where it came from. Make sure you understand where the data came from. And then if you have the system set up properly, now you can really do the math. And I think another big kind of principle here is the more data points you have sort of continuously collected, the easier it is to project into the future. The easier it is to predict things that are going to happen in the future. Whereas if you're just pulling like a quarterly report or a yearly report, yeah, you can't really project that out. You can't really see which way the line is going, and then you end up being reactive to problems instead of proactive for problems. So go to the next slide, please. And so I think this is a really good example of what happens when you have the full picture. And this is a case study that we did of a combination of VergeSense and AppSpace in a customer that had a really big problem to solve, which is massive global portfolio, a very clear underutilization problem. It was very obvious that there was some problem and a right sizing needed to happen. Then the obvious question is, wow, we've got 15 sites around the globe. There's a lot of variables, a lot of money on the line. How do we do this effectively? What's sort of the proper strategy to execute a big dollar decision across such a significant portfolio? And so luckily, we had data from both of our systems in this decision-making process, and that allowed us to be a lot more strategic about it. And some examples of even just like at a high level, okay, what regions or buildings should we focus on first? If we have a good understanding of what are the sort of less utilized buildings or campuses, what are the more utilized building or campuses, that lets us zoom in and decide maybe we focus a little more on this one. Now, if we start to get into the actual data around individual room usage, we thought this was a really interesting anecdote. One of the sites, kind of a clear fingerprint of something wrong. We saw this concept of pretty high conference room usage, but very low sort of booking usage, right? And so on its surface, something's weird there. Oftentimes what that story being told is that these aren't real meetings, right? Oftentimes if you have people using meeting rooms without some established calendar reservation or even an ad hoc reservation going on the calendar, it might just be the case of, hey, if you have meeting rooms, I'm going to use them. It's an empty office. Who cares if I drop in a room? And so these combinations of the sensor data plus the booking signals really start to tell the story. Like, what is actually going on? Are these real? If you just had a motion sensor in the room telling you if the room was active, you might not get that full story of, yeah, they weren't being booked, but they were being used at a high rate. And then if you layer in things even further of like actually how many people were arriving into the rooms, now you really understand the dynamics of the meetings happening. Is this real collaboration? Is this important behavior that we want to encourage and maintain? Or is this sort of a side effect of having way too much space and it's something that we can right size? And so because we had all of these data sources in this scenario, we were able to cut the customer's footprint by a third confidently with really well-backed data to understand exactly where, exactly why, exactly what the reasoning was to do the cut. So really big success story and an example of what happens if you have the full story, how big of a step you can take and how confidently you can take a step. So I think we can go to the next slide. Great. And so I'm going to stay on this one, section 1. So the mindset shift. Yeah, you're probably noticing a theme here. Always on. The more that you can have these data sources connected, the better. Again, the two things that I like to always say to avoid is the data wrangling. So that's like instead of having data directly connected to your system, going out and like asking the data science team, can you pull a report for me? Or trying to pull the badge data export, or hooking up the systems only when you actually need to do that report. That's usually the static spreadsheet thing, right? That's like you are deep copying, you're going to some system, you're maybe running a formula somewhere else, and you're copying the data into that spreadsheet. Anytime you're doing that deep copy, you're losing the link. It's no longer live. If you want to do this again or do it continuously, you're no longer able to easily do that. And then instead of checking it again in a week or in a month, you're checking it again in a quarter or half of the year because you no longer have that ability to rapidly iterate. So really, really important. And at the end of the day, if you do these things, if you stop the data wrangling and stop the deep copying, you can sit more at the strategy side. I know one thing that we always get kind of put off by is how much of the job of like being a workplace planner is the unfun part, is the non-strategy part. And so if you can automate out the part of hooking up the data systems, having things flow constantly, you're making more strategic decisions. You are living in the world you want to live as an employee. You are making strategic decisions instead of this sort of, routine pulling and emailing and report collating and all of that sort of stuff. And we think that if you can live in the strategic world more often, you can make decisions a lot faster. So I think we can go to the next slide. And this is a quote from my good friend Kanav, been at VergeSense for a very long time now. He's seen many of the same things I've seen. Most organizations say they want data-driven workplace decisions, but few actually have the infrastructure to make them. It's not data-driven, it's data adjacent. And so I think that this is the big difference between, oh, I have a feel for the data, I'm going to make a decision, but I can make a decision, but I can't tie the actual inputs to the decision I made, versus every single decision I made is backed up with a real data source. And so I think these are sort of like symptoms of data adjacency disease, if you will. I'm sure everyone listening has seen these types of behaviors. Okay, the thing that triggers a right sizing event or an optimization event or a design review or whatever it is, or an employee behavior sort of level set is when people complain. That's reactive. Using a survey from last quarter, maybe that's the only data that you have available. You still have data, right? You know, we're data adjacent. We have a report from last quarter, or a survey from last quarter. Well, we know how fast things move. That often is outdated already a quarter later. So you may have the data, but if you're not looking at a more updated version of the data, you're really not getting an accurate picture. And then badge swipes, another common thing, extremely valuable in the world of just like workplace planning and how to operate a workplace. You can't do the job without badge data. But you really get into trouble when you start to extrapolate too far. If you are, just looking at badge data from the building level and then trying to make decisions about what's happening at a more granular level, how many people are on each floor, et cetera, you're guessing. You're data adjacent. And so really, these are the type of behaviors that we're trying to fix in many ways. Go to the next slide. And maybe, there we go, perfect. All right, so do you have the right space? I think one of the ways that I really like to think about just like the problem of having a good office is matching employee behaviors well to the design of the office. And so you have some inherent aspect of the employees that are coming into your office, and they might be the team they're on, maybe they're engineers versus sales, maybe it's the region you're in, maybe it's the industry you're in that defines their behavior, maybe it's just like a culture of your company, and you have a physical design of your office. Best case scenario, those are perfectly matched, right? Your employees are have these certain characteristics, and that the office design is well matched to that, and they sort of vibe together, for lack of a better term. They work well together. There's always a meeting room available, or the number of phone booths allocated is the exact right amount, but it's never well matched. The behavior and the design are never perfectly matched, and there's a couple reasons that can happen. Either the design is a problem, or the employee behavior is a problem, and as many of us know, they're both very hard things to fix. They're both not obvious to fix, but a physical remodel of an office, right? Carolyn, I think you were calling out the 200K number we had earlier on the slide. Like, it's a little silly number. It's not, those are not, the scale is a little bit bigger than that to do a true design and remodel. So really high barrier to design. So can we attack the behavior side of things? And so you can do little things to try to pull these two sides into more alignment. And one thing that I thought is a good call out on this slide is that a good way to affect employee behavior is through employee experience, right? If you have a better employee experience, they will naturally behave better. You'll have much less of this one person camping in a 12-person boardroom if the system is set up to encourage that. It's the carrot versus the stick. And a better employee experience is a way to address a better employee experience app, a better employee experience tools. All of that is maybe the most cost-effective way to better match the employee behavior to the employee design. And I know we'll be talking a lot more about that. We can go to the next slide. Great. So what we want to do is have a very holistic view of everything to diagnose these problems. Is the design matched to the behavior? So we want to ideally understand every aspect of the space. We know this isn't always possible, but there's ways to extrapolate from incomplete data it'd be best if you could really characterize what is the behavior. Are they using a lot of desks? Are they doing a lot of collaboration? When they're collaborating, what are they doing? And then if you have that full picture, all that is data sources connected, you can act a lot faster. And then probably my favorite part is like the proving of the ROI. To me, the magic comes in when you've made a big decision, you have the presentation ready of here's the decision we want to make. This is like a big design change or right sizing exercise, and you're presenting to the CFO or whoever it is, and they say, well, how did you come to that decision? And like the data adjacency person goes, well, we have sensors, or we have AppSpace, we have employee experience, like we sort of know what we're doing. We have Urge Sensor, but the real magic is, oh, actually, I have a slide for that in the appendix. This is the exact numbers we used. This is how we decided. We combined the systems together. The data was flowing all into a common place. And we know this amount of meetings were booked, this amount of meetings were attended, this is the ratio of meeting size to meeting room size. Here's the exact numbers we used to make the decision. That's sort of the cure to data adjacency disease. And so, yeah, I think together as companies, we're trying to make that happen. We want to have that slide in the appendix that makes you look good in front of the CFO, things like that. And so, yeah, we can go to the next slide. I think this is the last for my section here. We think obviously AI, we got to talk about AI. This is a webinar in 2026. It's not possible to miss the AI slide. But I think Urge Sense as a company feels very strongly that this is the correct, it's an extremely powerful tool. I've always said we've been an AI company from the beginning. And so we have a system very deeply built on AI. We call it the decision engine. I alluded to this before. The more that you have data wired up and things hooked up together properly, the more that you are sitting in the strategy level as an employee, workplace, person, and that's where you want to be. And AI is a really good sort of strategy partner, bouncing ideas, being creative, seeing what works. We do think we have this thing called the large spatial model, which takes in all the data from all the different systems, sensor data, booking data, whatever, and acts as a quantitative layer. So things are repeatable and there's a well-defined framework where you're making those decisions. But ultimately, we think that the true sort of LLM style intelligence is best at that strategy level and have a more well-defined layer being your sort of quantification of the problem. And so with that, I believe we are going to the next section, and I'll pass it back to you, Carolyn.
Great, thank you very much. And if you go to the next slide, Lee, Kelby did kind of allude to this, right? And you called it something different, the tool tangle. There are so many different tools. And you could have a badging system, a reservation system, a communication system, right? The sensors, but they're giving you different data, not a full picture. And if you rely on, the effort of not deep linking those, and so you're relying on the different data and cross-referencing it, and then even then, pull it all into a spreadsheet, use AI, you're still getting reactive data, right? So the goal is really to connect those tools together. Right, and so we think about it as mapping total presence, right? Combining all the different signals so things aren't fragmented. So when we talk about presence, there are ways to sense presence through sensors, right? Through Wi-Fi detection, through badge swipes. There are through check into the building, right? When you tie that to the application, which could be calendars, could be Office 365, could be Google Calendar, to a reservation system or kiosks where people can register, then you start to have real-time live data. And I'll talk a little bit more about ghost spaces on an upcoming slide. There are no more ghost spaces on the map, right? A lot of times we're talking to kind of prospects or helping people solve some problems where they're like, yeah, I've got these maps. It shows that stuff is not available, but I've got rooms sitting empty. How do we solve this? We have tools, but they're not connecting the tools. So if we go to the next slide, one of the key things you talk about connecting tools, and one of the things we're really focused on at AppSpace is the employee and the employee experience. Kelby talks about the employee experience. One of the worst things a company can do is create friction in the booking process, right? If it's hard to book, if it's complicated, if the data is not reliable, if I know I'm going to book this, but I'm going to show up and Kelby's going to be sitting there, even though I thought I booked it, or I'm going to show up and the room's not available, the employee experience is awful. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have bad behavior. And to me, it doesn't feel like bad behavior. I'm just going about my day. But for us trying to understand how the space is being used, we qualify that as like bad behavior. And sometimes I hear people say, well, it's really the company's administrative governance problem. Not really always. A lot of times it's just the systems are too complicated or too inaccurate for the employees. So they're going to go the path of least resistance. The other key thing is kind of meeting employees where they are. So not that it's only accurate, but have it be in the tools they're already using. Right? So key thing for booking is if your organization uses Teams, let them book in Teams, right? Let that be where they're booking, they're getting the notifications. If it's Google Workspace, let them do it there. You got to meet them where they are, especially if they're resistant to coming back into the office anyway. And will use any excuse to like, yes, too hard. So if I get there, I'm going to have bad behavior, or I'm just not coming in, or I'm coming in, swiping in, so you have bad badge data, and then I'm out, right? The other thing is a piece of, where do they live and spend their time? Could be Teams, could be they reserve in Google Workplace. Do you have a solution where they consume company information, right? Do you have an internet where they go to? Wherever they start their day, because a lot of times employees will plan their day before they get into the office. So I'll do it the night before, that morning. So wherever I start my day is where I want you to make this frictionless for me, right? Because as an employee, I'm not thinking about space management. Like, I don't care about all the data. I just want to do my job.
Yeah, I know one philosophy that I think both of our companies have is try to have the best user interfaces, right? We want to have the best user interfaces, but the best user interfaces are ones where it doesn't feel like user interface. It's just like happens automatically or is built into the thing I was doing anyway. And so the more you can sort of have this just be part of that workflow, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say not only part of the workflow, but should feel consumer-like, right? We all have we know what it's like if we use a Starbucks app or whatever app you use to Uber. It should be as easy as that, because I want no friction. Another thing that we're hearing more and more from our big enterprise customers is the importance of multi-tenancy, right? That companies a lot of times will have multiple Microsoft instances across the globe. And increasingly, as you're trying to look at the overall portfolio, you got to be able to connect those. And there's the user, you have to connect them so you have the data, but there's also the user experience. We have a lot of people, customers and companies we work with where they leverage concierge or executive assistants, and I need to be able to book for someone in London, and I also need to be able to book for someone in San Francisco at the same time. I have to have access to the multi-tenancy. And so not only does it provide the global portfolio view, but it makes it easier and gets rid of friction for the people who are actually your super users who keep the building running, right? So there's the employee piece, but then there's the piece of who are really the ones managing the meeting room life cycle and everyone's day to day. And it's important in doing that, of course, that there's strict security and data sovereignty. So that makes sure that, okay, if I don't have permission to be in that tenancy, maybe a room can be booked for me or I can book a room, but I don't have visibility into anything else in terms of security or data. So increasingly, if it's something you're not thinking about yet, it's something to think about because it will come up eventually as you think about your global portfolio. All right, for the next. The other thing is, I often find myself on the product side being a situation of saying, all right, we've had the vision, we've talked about what we should be, here's how it's going to do it. Like let's break it down to make it easier because it can feel overwhelming. It's like, oh my God, I have to connect all these systems and I have to have real-time data and I'm doing this wrong. Now, there's an easy way to do it. And so start to make it lightweight for your IT team that is going to, it's got plenty of other things to be worrying about. One of the quick things you can do is use the Wi-Fi data you already have, right? Connect that, pull that into a system. That starts to be one of the presence indicators that you can use, combining that with reservation data, with room booking data. And then the other thing is it comes up, and especially in the age of AI, right? Everyone's very, very in tune to the concept of privacy. So making sure that data is anonymized, right? And so find whatever solution you use, do your homework to make sure that's the case, because you ain't getting it past IT or security at all unless they can validate that and validate it quickly. So nothing slows down a product or brings it to a halt quicker than security concerns. All right, if we have the next one. So we alluded to this one too a little bit in terms of, the cost of ancient integrations. Too many tools is bigger. It's bigger than space. And I said before, employees don't think about space management. They think about going through their day. And, year after year, we run this workplace experience trends and insights survey. And we look at what's happening in the world of work, and it happens over and over. Employees are overwhelmed, right? They're overwhelmed by the different number of tools they have to use, whether it's going to communication or management or productivity. And employees regularly, only 15% said companies are doing this really, really very well. That's for the rest of the 85% of it, there is room, there's opportunity. And so if you're not connecting employees, and then it's like, okay, now we're going to introduce room booking, right? And now we're going to have you do that. And now we're going to add this other, it just feels like another layer. So just to give a plug there think about the systems you're using in general. You don't want this to be just another one that they're going to be hesitant to use. All right, for the next. Yes. And here's the promise, right? The financial implications. And again, my guess is that this is not shocking to anyone listening to this. But I was thinking about employees losing an average of 10.5 workdays per year. That's an extra week and a half of PTO, right? Imagine if a company had to pay for that, the liability costs, right? The downtime costs exceeding $5,000 a minute in large enterprises. And these are real numbers, right? And it's like, but we kind of put up with it, right? We think, well, yeah, there's friction here, but when you start to quantify it, you see that it is much bigger and much more expensive. And then the bottom one here is what I wanted to, point out as well. 30% of time on manual workarounds due to disconnected technology. It's like, well, I have to copy and paste this from here into there. I have to log into all these different systems. I forgot my password. My company uses SSO for this, but not for that. There is significant cost to it. And again, the relevance to space is we don't want to think about making things harder. We want to think about making things easier.
Yeah, and totally agreed with this. And one thing I'll add on that slide is that VergeSense as a company, at least early on, a lot of our focus was like mainly on the space, right? Be more efficient with your space. I know this number gets thrown around a lot in the industry of like, if you can attack employee product, not that attacking the sort of space, do I have the right amount of space? If I right size and can save money and be more efficient on space, you can save huge amounts of money, obviously. But they always say it's an order of magnitude up if you can affect employee productivity. If you can affect a 5% employee productivity increase, a better employee experience, something that makes the office more frictionless, that is a 10x the ROI that you get from actually optimizing the physical space itself. So it's just like nail that before you nail anything else if you really want to get the ROI. And I think you guys are really good at that. And that's something we learned as a company as we matured, and now we obviously really focus on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I said we talk a little more about ghost booking. So we're going to talk now about the math of optimization. So if we go to the next slide, I want to tell about one company that we work with, that I've worked with closely, and that actually we've worked with VergeSense as well on ghost booking. So ghost bookings, just to level set, are where someone books or space is booked, but no one shows up, right? It is what creates this false sense of scarcity. Well, one of the companies that we work with, we work with most of the large pharmaceutical companies across the globe, but one of them was opening a new headquarters in London and wanted to create this headquarters as the healthiest building in the world. And they're all in, right? With reservation, with sensors, with smart buildings, it's really an impressive place. But they're a little bit concerned about the fact that, ooh, we're having people come back to the office now. Not only is parking in London an issue, but the bigger issue is that we appear to have more employees, right, than we have spaces. And so there was concern about, all right, there's these ghost bookings, right? And so how they solved it was with the 10-minute rule. So if a room is booked, but there's a sensor in there and sees after 10 minutes empty, the meeting is canceled and the room is released. It goes back into inventory. And it sounds so simple, but this was a new idea a few years ago, right? At this point, it is a tried and true best practice rule. But what was really impressive about them doing that is that the person managing space was able to quantify, based on having the reservation data and the sensor data, was able to quantify the savings in dollars of the space reutilization. Is able to say, we saved, I'd have to look it up, can't remember exactly what the number was, but it's tens of thousands of dollars by being able to re-inventory rooms and make those spaces available. Now, if they were relying on kind of the gut and the original worry about like, oh, the numbers don't seem to add up here, they could have ended up like, we've got a scarcity issue. We actually need, we built this building too small, we need more floors, or we need more space. But in fact, with just this simple kind of 10-minute rule and the right technology, and they're able to deliver the ROI and go back to the business and say, this is why this works. And we can now make smart business and space decisions.
Yeah, and Carolyn, I just wanted to emphasize, I know both of our companies, right? Any business, our pitch is we provide ROI. And a lot of times our ROI is like, we know it's there. It's sometimes hard to draw the line directly from the service being provided and the exact ROI. We all love this one because it's so pure. It's like, it's the thing you put on the slide. You are saving exactly this many minutes. This is how much the productivity of those meetings sort of equates to in dollars per employee. That's a big number. And it's powered exactly because these two systems came together. And this is the money we've paid on these spend on these systems. This is how much money we recovered. It's so pure. And it's a way to really back up the sort of broader, the employee experience is better, the office runs better. Well, yeah, but we also have this hard number you can touch and feel that's like provable that we have a really big ROI. So I know we love this one. It's always a good slide in the deck when the slide, the appendix slide in the deck to the CFO. This is the perfect example of
Yeah, exactly. And this is, it was pure ROI. It's like, this is what I did. I went and told CFO. It's like, fantastic.
All
right. So one of the things we haven't talked about, but that I have another story around this one, is the energy savings piece, right? That right sizing is a sustainability lever. I think we know that, right? If you are able to make your spaces available based on the number of people, right? To have power to those, lights on, HVAC, all connected to what's actually happening. And then with AI, it allows much more dynamic changes in those areas. Think about it. If you have people coming to the 7th floor and you've got, I'll use Kelby and I again as an example. He knows I'm coming. He's sitting way on the other side and I'm sitting here. What a waste, right? And that is something that we hear customers running into all the time, which is part of what brings them to this. Like, okay, actually, the way we want to do it is we want to group people in zones. We want them to be in this part of the floor. And then only when that gets to 70% capacity, let's open up the next. Or when this whole floor gets there, let's open up the next floor. So there's a significant sustainability savings here. Another one of our customers that we work with, global enterprise customer consulting firm that you'd all be familiar with if I mentioned it. They took a really interesting approach to power. They wanted to savings with power. They wanted to change employee behavior where people weren't checking into reservations, right? And so rather than saying, well, bad employees, right? Or they said, let's figure out how to change this. And it's a bit of a carrot, a stick, but it's also a carrot. What they did is they set up these systems where when you have to check into the desk to turn the power on. So I can get there, I can squat, but I can't use the monitors, I can't plug anything, I can't turn the lights on until I check into that reservation. And people have completely accepted it. And so they now have really specific data, not only about power usage, but also who's checking in, who's really there. And then they built rules around it. Okay, if someone steps away for X amount of time, the power goes off. But so you need the flexibility to do all that. One of the things, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kelby. Actually, nope, if we go back, we're going to talk a little bit about about floor mothballing, right? This is a phrase you use, and I know I talked a little bit about kind of the concept, but can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think folks have realized that right sizing isn't always this like simple thing. And one of the reasons it isn't a simple thing is because utilization is very peaky, right? It's like you often have people coming in 3 days a week or 1 day a week or whatever it is. And yes, you need your space to accommodate the peak, obviously, right? You want to make sure that when your when your office is at peak load, it accommodates that. But in the old days, it was sort of 5 days a week. Every day was the same peak, and you just did the same thing every day. In a world where like Mondays and Fridays are completely dead, what do you do, right? Like you have these completely empty spaces with no one there, but they need to be there because at some point Wednesday is going to roll around and every conference room is going to be full and every floor and people are going to be moving around, and it's going to be busy. So floor mothballing is a really becoming more popular in the industry to solve that problem of like, okay, we know because we have such a good picture of sort of the dynamics of a week or a month, or maybe it's seasonal as well. We know that on Mondays, we can accommodate the number of people that we need to accommodate with maybe 2 of the 5 floors, right? So like the intention is those 3 floors, we're not subletting them or, exiting the lease or anything. We're just going to turn off the lights on Mondays and encourage people both by, communication and by, physical means and by all the different ways to use those floors that are activated on the light days, but then we still retain the capacity for those heavy days of the week. And so it's a big decision. It requires data to sort of be confident that you can do that, to know that I actually can mothball and sort of compress the folks down that are coming in on Mondays and Fridays into this area. But if you can do it confidently, massive energy savings. The mothballing comes from like everything's off. The lights are off. Even the HVAC can be off. Massive savings if you can execute this strategy properly and is truly like a hybrid way to run an office. Your office is adapting to the load that's happening and fluctuating over the week. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this. It requires some setup. It requires some study. It requires some expertise to do it right. But when you do it right, it's another example of like a pure ROI case. You can, every second that the lights are off and the HVAC is off and everything is off on those mothballed floors, you raise the counter, the dollars saved counter, the ROI counter, and it's really pure ROI story. So we really like it. And then I think, I'll just go into the next slide here. On-site clarity. So just more examples. I was emphasizing before the relative importance of addressing the employee experience versus the cost of individual of the actual space itself. Here's some really great examples of like how to attack the employee experience side. How do you unlock the 10x ROI instead of the core space saving lease square footage cost ROI? Live maps, bread and butter for us is like in an office, especially when things get tight. Really a way to improve productivity is to let people dynamically find the places that are available. Maybe they want to find the places that are quieter. Maybe they want to find a conference room at a time when things are extremely high load. Whereas, in the unconnected, unintegrated world, they might have wandered around 3 floors for a half hour before they found a room that was free. Here, they just look at the kiosk and or look at the live map and find a place to work. Room health, just everything around like understanding. And this is one thing that we have just seen so much interesting correlations about, is just correlating different data sources. How does lighting affect usage? How does temperature data affect usage? Employees have different preferences. They work better in different environments. You might see some occupancy pattern or utilization pattern where like, hey, this room doesn't really get used. Like, what's going on? It's the same as all the other rooms. Well, it's probably not the same as all the other rooms. Maybe it smells bad, or it's cold, or it's way too bright and the blinds don't work, something like that. So really being able to tailor, again, the sort of the space itself to the behavior of the employees. If you match them well, good things happen. And then, yeah, I mentioned the kiosk. So if you can just have this live view of the office, the load balancing, understand where people want to go, it's just a frictionless experience. You save those so precious productivity dollars, and it's real ROI if you hook these things up properly.
Yeah, before we move off the slide, I'm going to give I know it is 2026. We can't not talk about AI, but I say just imagine a place, where you've got all this data, you're trying to understand what are the most popular rooms, or why isn't this room used? To be able to use conversational AI in a system where all the data is together to say, all right, what are the most popular rooms and why? Right, and people see, well, actually, this is popular because it has 2 monitors, because it's got big windows, because it's got the automatic shade, so the lights go down, or so the light goes down. It's as you pull all the data together, the ability to get away from spreadsheets and actually just query it and say, look for the insights, look for the pattern. That's what all this leads to, and that's what I'm really excited about as we move forward here. But it's just the immediate access to the analysis.
It's such a good point. And like so often, even in the past, this data was like possible to collect. It existed in a database somewhere. It just wasn't possible to like connect to the larger picture. And one of the reasons we can just like tell that broader story is because we have this power to hook everything together, do a deeper analysis, and link up all these systems. So really something that wasn't possible until we had this powerful tool at our fingertips. So really exciting. All right, I think on to the next slide, please. So, yeah, I mean, the punchline on this slide is right sizing is harder than it seems sometimes. There's a very fundamental question of like, what is the proper amount of space for the employees that I have today? Obviously, there's a projection and future aspect of it as well. But there's just a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of things you need to account for to make sure that you're actually making out of the decision properly. And as we also mentioned before, there's maybe a lot of intuitive traps of like, hey, all the meeting rooms are used, we need more space. Well, actually, no, if you dig deeper, it's exactly the opposite. You need less space, or you need to influence employee behavior before you attack the design, all of that. And pulling it all together with, Carolyn, as you teed up perfectly, the AI glue that helps you do the strategy that maps all of these systems together. It's really possible to make what can be scary, rightfully so. It should be a scary decision to right size because it's dollars, it's a lot of money, it's a oftentimes unreversible decision. But if you have the system set up properly, if you have the right data feeds, if you have everything linked up, you can make this with confidence, AI aided, all of that. And I think probably one of the more important things too is like, once things get set up properly and data is flowing, it becomes a lot less of this like once every 2-year thing that's this massive project that we have to decide the entire global portfolio as a whole. You can do it more incrementally. If you make a mistake, you can undo it because you have data to help back it up. And if you have the systems wired up properly, you can do this more continuously. And then these decisions maybe become less, an incorrect decision becomes less consequential because you're adapting so rapidly. So yeah, I think it's important to use systems like ours, like the two of us on this call to make these decisions properly. All right, I think next slide.
All right, it's a product, so it has a roadmap, so it's got to be me, right? So we're going to talk 3 simple steps. I'm going to take us through the first one, then Kelby's going to take the last couple. So really easiest step 1 is clean up your calendars, right? Integrate whatever booking tool you have with your calendars, whether it's it's 365 or Google. Create that single experience and single intent. You can build everything on top of that. And it's important to look at this incrementally and to kind of break it down so that it is not as, oh my gosh, I have to do all of this today so I can do the planning and have this up. No. Most likely you've got a booking tool, you have calendars, connect those and start creating what we call the intent layer. So you've got source of truth, it's easier for employees, and you can start to measure what's really going on. This becomes your digital foundation before you add or start leveraging the sensors you have and start pulling that all in. So, Kelby.
Step 2. So layering another data feed on top of that. And I actually think these are kind of nicely in order of how, you know, the chronological order you should attack these problems. Once you have sort of that baseline systems hooked up, now layer in measurement of what's at the physical reality of what's happening. And there's a lot of ways to do it. Sort of our philosophy as a company, early on, it's very possible to have thought of us as like the sensor company. We have a sensor, we have, you know, this is the thing we do. We still have that. But a lot of our philosophy now is a comprehensive suite of measurement tools to help you understand at whatever resolution you need for a specific use case, what's going on. And so I think our real big philosophy is start zoomed out, start with the scalable solutions like Wi-Fi, like badge data, to understand at a macro level what's going on, building level, floor level. As you start to see maybe anomalies in that data, or hey, I'd love to know more about this, go deeper and then start to install sensors in specific rooms, maybe strategically deploy sensors so that they're aligned well with, you know, a system like AppSpace that has a, you know, the booking system set up and the employee experience app set up so that you actually, you know, force multiply a system like that and just be strategic about it. And we, you know, in a similar vein of like this job of managing an office and managing a workforce should be incremental and continuous. The same thing can be said about a data strategy. You can scale up, scale down, zoom in, zoom out, move, kind of really have a system that is, from a measurement perspective, perfectly adapted to the use case you have on that day. And we think all the different types of measurement solutions, from Wi-Fi, badge data, sensors, entryway sensors, and everything in between is the right way to do that. Now, if we go to step 3, automation, and this is where the magic happens, right? Once everything is sort of installed, wired up, onboarded, now you have a way to automate. And as we were hinting at before, really the best way to do this is the best interface is no interface. And so if you can have systems automatically wired up, automatically connected, things get auto released, HVAC adapts automatically, maybe the schedule is set up for mothballing floors, and cleaning is well optimized so that you don't waste time cleaning that haven't been. So yeah, I'm hearing a little background noise. I don't know who that is, if that's on our end or whatever. I don't know, Carolyn, if you're hearing that as well. But all right, sounds better now already. But long story short, once you wire up these systems, you get a system that is frictionless. The employees don't even notice that it's happening, and that's the best interface of all, is when the office is adapting automatically and just doing the things that you expect without you even really having to do anything different. You're doing the same things you're always doing, but it's just better somehow. And I didn't really notice why, and I'm more productive and the company's making more money and everyone wins. So that's the dream. And I think that's what we are really hoping to do with systems like ours. And so I think we can go to the next slide.
And I think with that, we kick it back to Lee, our moderator.
That's terrific. Thanks, Carolyn. Thank you, Kelby. That was a great presentation on better ways that we can all manage our space. And in fact, we've actually just published recently a guide that speaks to these problems and many, many more, along with solutions that folks can explore. So we are going to send out the webinar recording at the beginning of next week. And we're also going to include a link to our space management guide that features ourselves, VergeSense, Microsoft, Unisys, and other folks with great advice and learnings around space management. Or if you want, you can get the guide right now. I've just put the link in chat. And then to learn more about AppSpace and VergeSense, please visit our websites here, and that would be terrific. So we've got 3 minutes, and I did get questions, and I'll make sure we answer those in email. But here's one maybe we can answer. Both talked about using AI to predict how many people show up and what happens to peak demand if we change the hybrid policy and whatnot. But in my experience, AI can sound very confident and can equally be very wrong. So when I'm signing off on a real estate decision, how do I actually know I can trust what these AI models are telling me?
Love it. I could probably take that one, Lee. It's one thing that we hold near and dear as a company, that when large language models were first coming out, they were incredible. And the instinct was slap one of those large language models on the database and let the magic happen. And yeah, sometimes magic happens, but sometimes magic doesn't happen, and it's inconsistent, and it's very unbounded in the suggestions it can make and the access it has. And I think VergeSense, at least our philosophy has been, we still think these interfaces are so incredibly valuable at the strategic level, but there should be a well-defined quantification layer, a modeling layer that puts the AI and the large language models on rails, so that the calculations that come out, they're queried by an AI, they're queried by something smart, but they're maybe not done on the fly or made up methodologies. You have a very well-defined framework and methodology for doing calculations, for making decisions and doing the math. But then the LLM, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to that, I know we're just out of time, but in terms of AI, companies have their own AI. You have AI that your companies have validated, and so look for a system. I know it's one thing we do with AppSpace, where you can use your own AI. You can bring that into the system and bring your own model, whatever is approved, to make life easier and to get rid of some of those concerns.
Agreed.
That's great. Terrific. All right. Well, listen, thanks very much again for being here today. And thank you for everybody that joined the webinar. And again, we'll be sending out that recording early next week. So take good care and have a great day.
Bye all.
Thank you all.